Hey, you guys. Hey. All right. Well, so good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. And I would like to see where you are in the world. So drop it in the chat there. And welcome to really, it's mid-August, but summer is winding down. School is open here in California. Kids went back to school on Monday. I don't know what it's like wherever you are in the world, but that just blows my mind. I mean, there's no way as a kid that I was going back to school in the middle of August. It was always after Labor Day in September, and they've just rolled it back. So parents are probably heaving a huge sigh of relief. And even the kids, I bet, after, come on, all this time they've been out of school, and now they're back in. And I bet that's a good thing. So, but, it's interesting how you feel the change of seasons. There's always, for me, this sort of fall feeling in the air, where it just starts to get a little crisper and you just sort of feel it. One of the things I used to love surfing in the fall. There's just a cool thing, you get just the feeling of it, and it's not super cold. You still got summer, but you get, the days are getting shorter, and we're feeling all that. It's a great time to photograph, obviously. We love the golden hours, and if you guys haven't been photographing a lot yet, make sure you get out. This is your time, okay? Make sure you get out. That's the whole point. I'm going to be talking about the 5 mistakes, big mistakes that people make in terms of their own creativity, not just in photography, but really any kind of creative activity. So, hey, Joe in Louisiana, good. Thank you for checking in. Who else is out there? Love to see who you guys are. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and there's, a connection, which is great. Okay, so you guys ready to, bump up your creativity? Because that's really what the name of the game is. It's like creativity really monitors everything. But before we get into that, let's just start at the beginning. I am a photographer, author, educator in Carmel, California. My name is Marc Silber. And our show is brought to you not by this guy. Let's see what happened to my screen. There we go. Bay Photo Lab. It's our go-to lab. I love these guys. I've been working with them for decades, and they will make prints. And if you've been following me for any time at all, you know that my mantra is get your work into print. And so here's how you can do it. 20% off on frame prints. I also believe in framing your prints because it just puts, it's just like framing a photograph. When you frame a print, it puts a polished look there. It adds a layer, and it just dresses up your print. You definitely don't want to just slap a print on the wall and let it peel off. So 20% off on these prints you get made that are framed. There's a code here. And then 25% off on Bay books and albums. We're talking about making books, and this is one way you can do it, 25% off. You guys should be making your books. That's what we're doing in the AYP Plus class, is we're making books, and it's not only fun, it's a really important way to elevate your photography. And then you get 25% off on all photographic prints. There's a whole range of, you can see on this page here, range of different papers, really great papers, 25% off on any of those. And as always, you get 25% off on your first order. So afterwards, not now, afterwards, I want you to head over there and order something from Bay Photo Lab, okay? All right, so let's get down to our discussion. So creativity is so essential that I wrote a whole book about it. If you haven't seen it or you don't have it, you should get a copy of it. It's not just me talking about creativity. It's me talking about my experiences, but also I interviewed 12 really highly creative people, including Chris Burkhardt. If you're familiar with his work, he's got close to 4 million followers on Instagram. Camille Seaman, amazing photographer. But also people like Chris McCaskill, who you may or may not recognize, but he was the co-founder of SmugMug. I use SmugMug all the time. Chris has an unbelievable story, and I got these stories about how they made their journey to creativity, and many of them had amazing things they had to overcome. Chris McCaskill, co-founder of SmugMug, grew up on the streets of Oakland homeless. Whoa. He ended up going to Stanford, getting an MBA, working for Steve Jobs, and being a serial entrepreneur. This is a kid who had no home. He lived under a bridge. His mother had severe mental illness, and she took her kids with her, and they lived under a bridge. It was unbelievable. So he talks about what it was like to re-enter society, and how every day was like a gift to him, because he knew what it was like on that side of the world, and he knew what it was like getting in a school bus, taking a shower, being around friends, going out and having an ice cream. I mean, these simple things that we kind of take for granted, he didn't take for granted, which is a big part of creativity, is like knowing that you're doing something that's unique and really grasping that. Okay, so that's what's in the book. I'm going to just sort of talk about the biggest mistakes I see people making, okay? And by the way, I would like to see your questions as we go through this. You know what, Jared, I didn't do here? I didn't say make sure you subscribe and enable the bell, right? Because you don't want to miss any of our upcoming episodes. If you don't enable the bell, you won't get notified. So please do that.
And you should like the video too, so that
also,
other people can see this.
Yeah, please like the video if you like it. Please put a thumbs up there, and that's always helpful. And hi, Terry. Good to have you with us. So let's get down here to, and I want to definitely address your questions. So please throw them into the chat. So the cycle of creativity. This is an extract from my book, and I wrote this kind of introduction to it. Many photographers, probably you guys, have told me that their big urge and desire is to become more creative. Now, what is the single most important guiding principle that guides your creativity? Let me ask you this. Is it your equipment? Have you ever had a camera say, hey, Mark, point over there. I don't care about artificial intelligence. I'm talking about the camera telling you what to photograph. Your equipment isn't going to tell you that. Your editing software isn't going to tell you what to photograph. It's not even going to tell you really how to edit it. No matter where you are in the cycle of photography, it's driven by one thing. And the most important ingredient is, guess what? The most important ingredient turns out to be you. And that's what you want to nurture. That creative spark, that creativity is what I like to help people fan the flames on and nurture. So the biggest mistake, the first mistake you can make, is thinking that you are somehow going to become more creative because of different equipment or better camera or whatever. Hey, look, I love cameras as much as everybody else. I've got a lot of cameras. I've got a lot of equipment. But it's you behind the lens that directs that. And if you don't start there, and that's what visualization is, it's you with your vision, that's where you start. That was the biggest point that I learned from Ansel Adams, was that if you just press the shutter, you're taking snapshots. Snap, 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 he says. But if you visualize beforehand, now you're becoming an artist. Now you are an artist. And visualization doesn't have to take a long time. It can occur in a split second. Bam! If I visualize something, often I go, whoa, that'll look really cool if I stand over here. Or if I crouch down low. Or maybe I change lenses. Okay, yes, you do use equipment. Maybe I go from, a normal, quote, normal lens to really wide, and that's going to look better, and that's my vision. But it all starts with your visualization, and that's what you want to nurture, and you want to feed that every day. You want to strengthen your visualization. There's a lot of ways to do that. One is to look for photographs. Use your hands. If you're in another art form, and by the way, creativity is what I'm talking about here, not just photography, because most really great photographers that I know are also multi-creative. Bob Holmes, for instance, you may or may not know this, but he started out as an architect, and he obviously has that visual sense, but he's also a really talented writer. And he has other creative skills, that his humor, for instance. But most photographers that I know have more than one area that they're creative in. Ansel Adams had to make a choice between being a concert pianist, that's what his path was, to he fell in love with photography, and he said, I can't do both of these at once. So he continued to play the piano, but he didn't do it as a profession. So whatever your creative areas are, and I say areas because I hope you have more than one, you want to incorporate your vision into it always. Always. What is your vision? If you're creating a book, what's your vision for this book? How many pages do you want it? How are you kind of thinking it being laid out? What's the end result you want the viewer to have when they look at your book? Where are you going with this thing? Do you want to create a book like Dan Milner talks about, making a book that is a calling card, a business card? That could be a short, little, small book. Great. It's a great marketing tool because it tells people who you are and what you do, and there's your vision of it. So always do not shortcut this step of visualization. How do you feed your visualization? How do you fan the flames? And you should do that constantly. You look at other art forms, and I don't mean just photography by a long shot. For instance, there's a 6-part series called McCartney 321. It's on Hulu, and I've just gotten through watching. I'm going to watch it again. It's Paul McCartney being interviewed by Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin is an incredible producer. I don't remember the whole list of groups he's worked with, but an enormous number of groups. And he's interviewing Paul McCartney. It's fascinating to hear their creative process. So you're going to learn stuff that will spark creativity in your own photography. I look for, and I don't like to just watch random stuff. I like to watch things I'm going to learn something from. But, music, other photography, obviously, other works of art, go to museums whenever they're open again, or look at them in a book or online. But don't just go flicking through pages like Instagram style. Stop. If something resonates for you, stop and really look at it and find out, why does this resonate? What is it that the artist did here? How did they frame it? What light source did they use? What was it about this work of art that intrigued me? And I have a wide range of artists that I really think are great and inspire me. Andy Warhol, for instance, I thought, man, this guy plucked out of our culture icons, things that we'd all seen every day, and he made them into art. And I think that's an incredible ability. Like you might know that his 39 or whatever it was Campbell soup cans. Who would think of Campbell soup as a form of art? But he did show us. You may not agree with me. I don't care. I mean, you may think, well, Mark, that was just him copying a label. But he took something that we all walk by and see, and it's on our shelf. It's on the supermarket shelf. And he showed us how to turn it into art. Edward Weston did the same thing. He took everyday objects like a toilet, a pepper, cheese grater, and seaweed, and showed us how it could be art, and showed it to us in such a beautiful way that you couldn't help but stop and look at the beauty. That's a great way to live your life, is to go through life and look for things that are beautiful or that resonate for you. Okay, so I could go on and on and on about visualization. It is the most important part. It isn't the only part, though. So don't get lost and think, well, that's all I got to do is sit around and visualize all day. That's not going to give you any art. So the next thing you got to know is, and this is worded not as just photography, but again, any creativity. So what's the next step? You got to know your tools. What tools are you working with? Are you working with a camera? What camera do you use? How well do you know it? Do you know it so well that it's not going to get in the way of your photography, as Bob Holmes says? Don't let your camera get in the way of your photography. Have you ever fiddled around and been changing lenses and doing this and that and missed a shot? If you're saying no to that, that's not being truthful, because we've all done that. I've missed so many shots, it's painful. But you're going to miss them to the degree that you're fiddling with your camera. And even doing this, we call chimping, where you're looking at the back. All the time you're doing this, you're going to miss the shot out there. Where you want your attention is there. I'm not saying you can't look at the back of your camera to see if you got it or not, but don't just do this so constantly that you're distracting yourself from what's going on out there. You got to know your tools, and the tools need to work for you in terms of fulfilling your vision. They're not an end all in themselves. And most of what you'll see on YouTube is people talking about, what's the newest gear. Do you really think the newest gear is going to make you a better photographer? I mean, come on. Some of the best photographs in the world ever were created with some of these cameras that I have behind me that are obsolete. Quote, obsolete. They're not really. The Leica, the Rolleiflex, the Hasselblad over here. They are not digital. They're not fancy. They don't have they're incredible lenses, but they don't have a zillion menus, and they're not updated. So get over that idea that your next camera is going to make you an incredible photographer. I hope it does, but look, it's much more important, as I said at the beginning, who's behind the lens? What are you doing? How do you approach the subject? And where do you find that next image? Okay, you got to know your tools. If you're writing, you got to know how to write. There's some really good books out there that can teach you how to write. The one I recommend, and I do, by the way, I think every photographer should write, because here's the deal. You're going to tell your story in a book. You're going to want to add text. People don't necessarily get the significance or the whole story simply from the photograph itself. And if you're trying to tell a story about it, add text. The book I recommend is called On Writing by Stephen King. Very good book. And I believe it's in our resource section of the Create book. If it isn't, it should be. Jared, maybe you could just drop that into the chat. It can't hurt, right?
Yeah.
The resource link. So later on after the show, you guys can copy this link, but it's got all sorts of resources in it to add to your creativity. Okay. So know your tools, your lighting, whatever you're using in terms of your creativity. Lighting, if you're using audio equipment, then you should know how to record it so that you don't get a lot of weird noises and background noises and whatnot. We were just talking about that before the show. It's really annoying to have somebody like Jared go through and get rid of all the mistakes. It's better to do the job the first time right. Know your tools. Then what do you got to do? Work. So what's the mistake there? Because I said I'm going to give you the 5 mistakes. The mistake there's 2 parts of it. One is getting obsessed with equipment and thinking that's going to lead you to salvation and glory. And the second is not knowing your equipment well enough. That's a big mistake. If you don't know it well enough, and by the way, why you should not be switching equipment all the time is you just throw yourself into this maze of new learning experiences constantly. Don't do that to yourself. Get to know your equipment so well that it's second nature, okay? Number 3, you got to work your craft. What's the big mistake there? It's watching people like me and listening to podcasts and reading books and looking at your camera and thinking about it, but never getting out and photographing. Not working your craft. You got to work it, guys. I'm happy and I love that you watch my shows and you take my courses and read my books. But if you don't get out and work your craft, if you don't work it, nothing happens. And that's probably the single biggest thing. You visualize it, you know your tools, now you gotta get out there and work it. But that isn't really the big mistake. The big mistake is something I learned from David Campbell, who is in this book here. He's a producer and a musician, conductor. His son, he has 3 amazing children. One of them is Beck, if you're a fan of his music. I am. But David gave this really great advice. By the way, he has something like 480 gold and platinum albums to his name. 480, that's mind-boggling. 480. That means if he produced one a day, it'd be like a year and a half of gold and platinum albums. Incredible. Okay, so he knows a lot about creativity, and the thing that he said is do not shoot yourself in the foot when you get the creative process going. Often what comes back is not the greatest stuff in the world. If you've ever gone to a house and the faucet has been turned off, or you go outside to an outside faucet, it's been turned off for a long time, and then you turn it on, you know what comes out? Water mixed with rust and junk and debris that's been collecting in the pipe. And if you go, oh, this is really bad water, it's horrible water, and you turn it off, you miss the fact that you're actually flushing the system out. You're letting it roll. And you have to do that with your creativity. You got to let it flow. And he said, don't sit there and go, wow, this really sucks. I'm really stupid. I don't know how to photograph. I can't write, blah, 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 all that negative garbage that goes on in your head. Let it flow. Get into what we call a go flow frame of mind. This could be the biggest mistake of all creativity, but it's basically the one as far as working your craft. Get out there and let it work. Do not highlight, underscore, exclamation point. Do not edit yourself while you're in your craft stage. Editing is its own separate component, comes next. And don't self-criticize yourself either. Don't be your own worst critic. Listen, just so you know, I'm not trying to preach to you because we every creative that I know has to overcome that. You really do. I mean, again, 12 really skilled people. Nancy Cartwright, who you may or may not recognize, but she's the voice of Bart Simpson and dozens of other, I think 9 just on The Simpsons alone, voices, and then dozens of other ones. Incredibly talented voice actor. She has a master class. She's just unbelievable. And she had a journey that she had to overcome. Every one of these creatives did, so don't think, well, you have to be born this way and blah, blah, and that's another huge mistake. Okay, so don't make the mistake of sitting on either not working your craft at all, or criticizing yourself or stopping the flow or editing in the middle of working your craft. The worst thing you can do, like as an author, as a writer, what I do, I sit down and I just write. I don't even care about typos. I don't care about grammar. I don't care about anything. I just want the work out there. You know what? Editing is another process. Just let it flow, and I try to just put my, whatever it is, into words. I even do it, and I've done this as part of this book. On my way to surfing, I have a 45-minute trip to a surf spot I like, and I would record the chapter while I was driving, and then take it, transcribe it, and edit it later, but just let it flow, let it flow, let it flow. Okay. Terry, we'll get to your question in a minute. Let me just finish this. The next stage is editing, and the biggest mistake you can make of that goes back to what I just said. It's editing yourself while you're trying to work your craft. Keep it separate. Editing comes after you do it, right? In filmmaking, for instance, you're not editing while you're shooting. You're shooting. Now, does that mean you just shoot a lot of wasted footage? No. Same thing with a camera. Should you just go no, because you're going to have to edit that stuff. And do you want to edit 2,000 photographs, or would you rather edit 150? I mean, think about it. If you overload yourself with garbage that you've got to sift through, I'm not being very kind, but I think, if you're just pressing the shutter like that, a lot of it's going to be garbage. And if you're shooting a film and you just overload you or the editor with all sorts of stuff they got to go through, you're just clogging the process down. But beyond that, now we've created the footage, we've got the photographs, we've got the words. Now we go into a completely separate stage called editing. And a lot of editing has to do with getting rid of stuff. I have fallen in love with pieces of a film and I go, wow, I love this, blah, blah, blah. So perfect. Then I realize it just doesn't fit. That's why you have editors. That's why people edit, and that's why there's director cuts that add some of that stuff back. But, for the original cut, it didn't make it because as great as it is, it just doesn't fit. Same thing in writing. I mean, you can feel like, oh, I went to all the work to, write all this stuff. It doesn't belong there. It's unnecessary. Maybe I can use it somewhere else. In photography, we're editing also in terms of a sequence. Like if we're telling a story, what photographs will fit into that story, and the ones that don't, put them somewhere else. Doesn't mean we're throwing them away, but they're just not going to go into that story. So editing is a huge part of your process. The other part of editing is processing. Processing your images, going through your whatever your processing platform is, Lightroom, Photoshop, Capture One, whatever it is. Processing. That's a subset of editing. But you're always going to edit in the creative process, but keep it as its own stage. Otherwise, that's a huge mistake. Okay, the last step of the way is sharing your work. What's the biggest mistake there? Not sharing your work, or sharing it only on social media and thinking that's all you got. No, it isn't all you got. Social media is fast food sharing. How long are people looking at your images? Seconds. How long do I look at people's stuff? Seconds. Is that what your work deserves, or does it deserve a longer look? This is why I started the show and I said, Bay Photo will help you make prints. Make prints. Make prints. Say it with me. Make prints. The thing is, then you've got something you can put on the wall, which is the primary way you ought to be sharing your work. You go walk around my house, my studio, there's my photographs everywhere. I have one by Ansel Adams in another room, but the rest of them are all mine. So that's one great way to share your work. Put them on the wall. Put them on the wall of your office, your home. You can get into libraries are often looking for artists to submit their work. There's local shows. It's in my book, how to get your work out there. Get into exhibits. There's lots of ways to share. You can definitely put up a website which curates your own best work, and that's not going to be as fast food. And also people can order those prints. I highly recommend that. I use SmugMug, as I told you. Use them for years. I recommend them. What are some other ways you can share? You can get your work into a magazine. You can create your own zine or magazine. You can create your own books and get them out. You can put them in films. I love to do that. Add your still photographs to your video, to your motion. And I've done that many times where I come back from a trip and I want to take all these photographs that I've captured and put them in one place that's not going to bore people. And I make a 3-minute video, maybe sometimes 5, maybe 10, I don't know, something like that. But I edit in my photographs and tell the story about what I was doing there and how I captured them. That's a really, really cool way to share your work, because you can take a number of photographs and put them all together, and you can add music, you can add your own voiceover. it's cool, and I really do recommend that to you guys. Okay. But the biggest mistake of all this whole process is to leave your stuff on your computer, in your phone, in the case of negatives, in a shoebox or stuffed away somewhere, and not sharing it. It's so fulfilling to get your work out to the world. I'm telling you, I'm speaking from experience. For years and years and years, I had moved away from photography. I had a whole career as a management consultant, which, by the way, I've reopened. It's called Silber Consulting Group, and I am, especially through COVID, I'm definitely helping businesses not only get back on their feet, but go to a whole new level. If you are interested, you can check out that URL. That's the other side of Marc Silber that you may not know much about, but that's what I did for years and years and years. And I actually retired in that business and said, okay, I'm going back to my love of photography. I have so many negatives back here that I've never really published. And I started scanning my negatives, and I started putting a website together, and I did exhibits, and I did books, and I just got things rolling again. And it was really satisfying to unearth, to let those things come back to life. And you probably, my guess is, you probably have a lot of work that needs to come to life, that needs to be awoken. It needs to breathe again. It needs to get out to the world. And that's what sharing is all about. And don't make that mistake. So there you have the 5 biggest mistakes that I know of. You might have some other ones. So let's take your questions. I see Terry. Let's pop yours in here. I'll just pop it on the screen and see what you got to say. How about expanding genres? I shoot landscapes, but last weekend I went out in the countryside and shot the Milky Way for the first time. Had a blast. Really got my juices flowing. Ready to do it again. Absolutely, Terry. Absolutely. I need to do that, by the way. I've never shot a single image of the astrophotography. But I think it's really cool, and I think absolutely do that. When you're experimenting and you're trying different things, you're visualizing and you're going, yeah, let me try that out. Absolutely. The Beatles is an example. We're constantly doing that, constantly reinventing themselves, constantly trying some new thing. They added Eastern music, the sitar, into their rock and roll. They added strings, an orchestra, and they first thought, George Martin, their producer, said, let's add strings to Yesterday. Paul McCartney said, we don't do strings, we're a rock and roll band. That's not going to work. And George Martin said, well, just try it. If you don't like it, we'll get rid of it. And they put it in there, and it's like, Yesterday is the #1 song of all time. So you never know what you're going to find if you don't get out and experiment. Hey,
even if just adding on to that,
yeah,
because you were talking about the Beatles, how many bands are inspired by the Beatles?
Oh my goodness.
And of all genres,
all genres.
So
yes,
like Nirvana, I believe has the
oh
Beatles
yeah,
as
Dave
one of their
Grohl
inspirations, and from jazz to rap to hip hop, to rock. They all find inspiration from the Beatles. So just because, you don't even have to try experimenting yourself in a genre. You can find inspiration in other genres too, just in that way.
So true. Carmen, thanks for getting my book. And you said I had a very interesting childhood. Yeah, at the time I didn't know that it was that interesting, but especially when I sat down and started writing about it, then people have, even my sister, my older sister, said, Mark, I didn't know you were doing all that stuff. What? Because I didn't really talk about it very much. So this is another part of your creativity. When you do bring out these parts of your life that maybe other people don't know about, there's something very therapeutic about it. And even for yourself, clarifying, what was that all about anyway? And I became a photographer when I was 12 years old, and I had some pretty interesting adventures, and I talk about it in the book as well. So there's something Rob put on here. Let's put what you've got. I bought a lot of lenses lately, but just because I'm searching for the one, I don't want to change lenses ever. Daytime lens and a nighttime lens. Yeah, what lens are you looking for? So stop and think for a second. What are you? What's your ideal here? What are you looking for? This is where your visualization comes in. Are you looking for? I, for instance, shot with one lens for so long with this camera. It's a Leica M2, and I had a 35 millimeter lens. I never used the 50 even. I shot everything as a 35 millimeter lens. This camera has a fixed lens. It's a Rolleiflex. It's an 80 millimeter lens. That's considered normal for 2.25 square. All I shot was with that lens. If I needed to zoom in and out, guess what? I had to zoom with my feet, which I also highly recommend. So, as soon as you get that dialed in, Rob, you got the lens. Okay, I really like this lens. Then just work with it. That'd be my advice. Do I change lenses? Yes, of course, but I don't change them a lot. Honestly, what's my go-to lens? 24 to 70. What's the go-to lens for most pros that I've talked to? 24 to 70. Why? Because those focal lengths for a full frame image. That's pretty good. Sometimes I really do need a much wider lens. Okay, I'll switch over. Every now and then I go to 70 to 200. That's mainly because I'm shooting sports like surfing, and I can't get close enough with that 70 millimeter lens. I don't use it that often though, or a sunset or something. I want to compress it. I want to compress the moon, so I'm going to shoot with a longer lens. But I tend to not shoot with a whole lot of different lenses. Also, remember this. Every time you don't change lenses in the field, because every time you do that, you're letting dust into your sensor. You want to be really cautious about changing lenses. And I see people go out with a whole bag of prime lenses and they're changing them. They're doing two things. One, they're really slowing themselves down because they got to change lenses all the time, but they're also letting dust into their sensor, which is a nuisance when you got to go back and spot it. Okay, so Carmen made another note here. I've gone back to film, shooting black and white with a Holga. Those are interesting. And processing in my basement. Wow, my hat's off to you. Yeah, cool. I haven't processed a roll of film in an embarrassingly long period of time, but well done and bravo to you. And if that gets your creativity going, then go for it. That's really cool. Jared, did I miss any others that have come up here?
I don't think so. Paul had mentioned, up at the beginning, talking when you were, talking about, visualizing and stuff, that, it's about your perspective and time, place, and mindset.
Yeah.
Which is really important. That's a big influence on what you're visualizing.
Totally. Your mindset, yes, that's the whole deal. What are you looking at? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? And does this place maybe inspire you to do whatever? I go to Yosemite, I get inspired, but I also have to come back with something unusual because Yosemite's been photographed so much. I don't want to just, So one of my favorite photographs in Yosemite is one that I captured a few years ago. There were unfortunately a lot of forest fires that had brought such thick smoke to Yosemite Valley that you couldn't even see Half Dome. I mean, it was a blurry background. That made there's no way to photograph that made it look like anything. So a couple of days later, the air did start to clear, and it cleared up enough to see Half Dome, but it left a dark sky with texture in it, which was really interesting. And I photographed it at the end of the day with the golden hour hitting the dome, Half Dome, but it was also filtered through the smoke, so it was quite orange. And that was inspired by that place, obviously. But yes, time, place. Hey, listen, we talked about it one time on one of my shows or AYP Plus class about photographing at different times of the day. I showed an example of a photographer who was photographing in the middle of the night, in Tokyo. And it's just like, what are you going to capture? It's very, very different than broad daylight in the middle of the day. So yes, you can get inspired by all sorts of different things. try these things. That's the big part of creativity is you got to try. You got to test things. You got to, you know, you got to get out there and try different angles, try different times of the day, different moods of the day. Like even during a rainstorm, it's raining. What do? Maybe you take your GoPro out, you know, don't get your expensive mirrorless wet, but you have a GoPro or you have an iPhone with a housing or whatever it is. Go out and shoot in the rain. See what that's like. You're never going to know until you do it, right? I mean, that's the important thing.
And I think another interesting thing to keep in mind too is like think about, you know, the stuff in your own life, you know, and use that to inform your art. I mean, you know, one of the great examples I can think of is J.R.R. Tolkien with The Lord of the Rings.
Boy, no
heavily
kidding.
Influenced by his experiences in World War One. You know, if you study his experiences in his life, you see the parallels.
There was a movie about that showed that. Yeah, very definitely. Okay, guys. Well, listen, I wanted to give you some tips. We're going to, post this video. Jared might even edit it down. So we've got the 5 points. Don't forget those things. Use them. Don't make those mistakes. Don't step into that. Okay, some news. A couple of things. We are doing a sale, kind of almost end of summer sale, the golden hour sale. I think, Jared, do you have that code or link ready for these guys? Just to pop that in.
I do, and I'll be putting it here in the chat in a second.
Okay. So
we do have a quick question.
I see that. So any tips for shooting architecture? I'm not an architectural photographer. Bob Holmes would be a good person to talk about since he transitioned from being an architect to a photographer. But what do you say here? Shy away from it because buildings are the architect's art? You want to try to add something inspired by your earlier comment. Okay. Well, yes, it's their art, but how you capture it is you, you know? I mean, think about it. Like I've photographed the Eiffel Tower, and that's their work of art, which, by the way, is copyrighted by the French government. If you shoot at night, they have a copyright on it. But you have your own unique take on that building, and I wouldn't hesitate to go out and photograph it. Look at it like this. You're photographing, it's a portrait of that building. I love portraiture in almost every form. I take portraits of mountains. I take portraits of deer and dogs and horses. It's a portrait, and you're taking a portrait of a building. Just like a person, you have your own unique perspective. Don't hesitate. And that's true of any work of art. You're not plagiarizing if you take somebody else's work of art and you capture it in a unique way. If anything, you're expanding on what they've created, which is always a good thing. Okay, so
you know what would really help with that?
What's that?
What would really help is if you want to feel like you're creating, you know, something original with what they're doing, knowing a lot of composition tools would probably really help with that, I bet.
Absolutely. And there you go. You can get 30% off.
We have a whole course on that.
We have a whole course. You'll get 30% off. Also, you can join our AYP Plus class and meet with us every Tuesday. Also 30% off, right, Jared? That's one of the things. Everything in our catalog is a discount.
It's in there.
So go for it, you guys.
Store.
Yeah. So that link that he just put in there will take you to there, and just add that Golden 21. Okay, next week, Dan Milner joins us again from his road trip. I don't know where he is even. He might be in Maine. He might be in New York. He's joining us from the road. We're going to take a look at the next step on getting your work into print. That's next Thursday at 10 a.m. Dan Milner, okay? And as always, every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, we meet as a group on AYP Plus. I'd love to have all you guys in there. If you aren't already in there, grab a hold of the discount code and join AYP Plus. Okay? And beyond that, I'm just going to remind you to subscribe and enable the bell. Leave your comments, like the video, share. And Jared, is there anything else before we sign off here?
No, I think that's it.
I think that's it. Last but not least, right? Remember to get out and capture your own images of life. Take care, you guys. Love you. Stay creative. Don't make those 5 mistakes. Do the positive. Get out there, visualize, use your tools, work your craft, edit, and share. And I'll see you guys soon. Take care.